There's lots of talk about past lives. Is there a past life? How come we cannot remember it? And are there any ways to break through the memory barrier? And is there an actual need to do that? Why do we have to deal with the old stories of the past? My guest today says there may very well be good reasons to break through that barrier. Welcome, Ulrich Kramer.
Hello, Robert.
How do you like my fancy studio?
Well, it is certainly impressive.
Certainly impressive. You're a graduate psychologist and a transpersonal psychotherapist, and you've also developed a very interesting methodology that is called MindWalking, which we're going to address today. So let's talk about that transpersonal thing. I mean, usually when you hear about psychology, it's all about solving problems in your childhood. You had a trauma in your past somewhere. You know, somebody stole you the ice cream, and that traumatized you so much that you know it's still, you know, it's still in you. You know, it still has effects in your current life. But in transpersonal psychology, it's not quite like that, is it?
It is like that, and there's more. In, say, standard psychology, the biography of a person is considered, but not more than that. However, there are prenatal influences, and even that would be considered transpersonal. And the trauma that is really causing the aberrant behavior may not be just your having lost your ice cream or your teddy bear when you were 1 year old, although that hurt you tremendously and you made a lot of noise about it, yes. But it is not really traumatic in the sense of broken bones and defeat and all that sort of thing. So searching for the source of aberrant behavior, you eventually wind up with stories which are outside the biography of a person, and that's why it's called transpersonal. And that work is very exciting because you never know in the beginning what's going to happen between the session guide and the session partner.
So you kind of transcend the lifespan of a person?
That's very well put, yes. The lifespan of the person, as much as that person or his parents know it, is transcended, and other worlds, other lives, other biographies open up.
Okay, so can you give me an example of that?
Well, it always starts with a specific problem you wish to solve, because there is something keeping you from living life as fully as you feel it ought to be lived. So there's a shortcoming of some sort, a barrier, and you want that barrier to be done away with. So you say, I'm the sort of guy who just can't win. Whatever I'm touching, I can't win, so that is the problematic situation. Now you go through the life of that person, all the times he couldn't win, and you find there is no real answer in this life. So once you have exhausted the store of memory images of this life, there's a blank, and when you then persist, it's something like a curtain was drawn open and other images not having to do with this life will appear, and suddenly you will be, just to give you an example, I'm inventing this now, you will find the example of, say, a runner who was at the point of making it at the Olympics and stumbled and fell down and got hurt and didn't make it, and that loss was so tremendous that it carried on and on and on, even into the present. Now, whether that incident is my client's past life, we do not know, but it is a past life. So the point is, the stories coming to mind are certainly stories of past lives, But whether they are your personal past life or someone else's past lives, you cannot tell. There's no possibility to prove the point.
So that
However, let me just finish the sentence. However, the moment you have handled the traumatic loss of that life, your behavior pattern in this life will change. So the question, is it yours or is it not yours, is not really that important. The point is, find the incident and resolve it.
Okay, so that's the transpersonal aspect of it.
That's right.
That you do not necessarily find an incident in your personal past life, but may very well be that you stumble across somebody else's traumatic incident.
That's right.
But how come that somebody else's traumatic incident can impact you so much?
Well, if it's with you, if it's stored inside your, it's a bit spooky to say this, if it's stored within your memory banks or your memory storage space, there is no such thing, but I'm using it as a way of saying it. If something is stored inside your memory storage space, it has power over you, whether it's your own experience or an experience downloaded from another, and I'm using this term very deliberately. It is the same process as if you were downloading a file from the internet into your personal computer. So there's something like a collective memory storage space containing all the trauma of war and violence and disaster and catastrophe that's been going on since the beginning of mankind. And out of that, you can draw material and put it into your own memory banks, and that acts on you with the same power as if it were your own. So whether own or foreign, doesn't matter, it has power.
Okay, so and you don't try to find out whether it is your own memory or if it's somebody else's memory, or
people want to know this. People want to find out. It is not my point finding it out. My point is there is an image, and that image has power. You neutralize the image, you deflate the power. The person can now operate in a self-determined way, which before he couldn't. But the client is interested to find out, was that me? And of course, the question is relevant to his sense of identification. And the client will find the answer. He will, with great certainty, tell you, that is an attached thing, that isn't mine. And he will say, yes, that was me. That person in that incident, that person who got eaten by the lions in a Roman arena, that person who got killed as a Red Indian by the British cavalry when the West was conquered, that person was me. I mean, all these images are there to be picked up. This sense of identity is very important, which is shown by the following example. I once had a person who was given the idea in some sort of therapy that the image of a hangman and a torturer who'd come up inside her, that this image referred to herself. And she walked around life in the belief plus disbelief that she had been a torturer and a hangman. And that worried her no end. And she, for literally 30 years, had a hard time, because that therapy was 30 years ago. And when this got fixed, when she, through working with me, came up with the realization, this is an attached thing, I never did this, a whole load fell off her. So a misidentification can be very dangerous to the spiritual and mental health of a person. The correct identification will help.
Okay, so you created MindWalking, which is the methodology a way to find those memory aspects, those primal scenes.
Right.
Right? You call them primal scenes.
I call them primal incidents.
Primal
this
incidents.
is taken from Sigmund Freud's term primal scene. Sigmund Freud thought that behavior is governed by traumatic scenes of very long ago, which he called primal scenes, but in Freud's days, this was sort of early childhood. But I have found that it goes further than that. I call them primal incidents. But yes, this is what I'm finding out through MindWalking.
Okay. And what is the actual difference between a hypnotherapist or a regression therapist and you being a MindWalking trainer?
Therapy in general tends to make a diagnosis and put whatever the person says in a theoretical framework and interpret it inside this framework. So, in other words, me as a therapist, in the strict definition of the word, I would tell you what you have to think about yourself. Because within my frame of reference, whatever you say is interpreted in such and such and such a way, and that means that you are so-and-so. That is done in therapy. It's diagnosis and interpretation and analysis. Whereas what I'm doing in MindWalking, I do not interpret or diagnose at all. I'm asking you, what's your problem? You say, I can't win. So I say, what memories can you recall with reference to I can't win? So I'm opening an association space. And whatever comes in is narrated by you in all detail, which makes it disappear, and the next thing comes up, which makes it disappear, and so on, until we get to a primal incident.
And you don't judge.
And I don't judge.
What's coming up.
That's right. The whole point is, I'm not saying that's important, that's not important. I'm saying, does it have to do with I can't win, or does it not have to do with that? And you will come up with all sorts of stuff relating to the session topic, and that will lead you down to a primal incident. And the motor, the driving motor behind it all is your interest. I don't have to do much. It is you who pull yourself forward and forward and forward because you want to know. So in hypnotherapy, they use hypnosis. In regression therapy, they use fantasy journeys. They use imagination, they use imaginary techniques. I found that this is not needed. People don't need any of these props and supports. All they need is the right line to follow on their recall, and they will come down to the hidden box of treasure.
Okay, so let's assume I'm a client of yours. I'm sitting in a session with you. You also have this interesting device which we're going to address later. Okay, and then I start remembering things, and there's images, associations coming up, and all that. Leading me to my primal incident. But how do I really know that this is not just a fantasy journey? This is not just an imaginary scene. I mean, how would I, being the client, be able to tell whether this is fantasy or it is something real?
Because it hurts.
Really?
When you recall the real stuff, your body hurts, your tears run, you twist in the chair, you take on odd positions even before the image of the incident comes up. So you begin to dramatize, meaning to replay a story of long gone, a story of perhaps another who really wound up in a very bad spot. And you begin to replay this physically with pains and emotions, not yet knowing what it is. And then the images will come and add to that, and then you get the whole story of somebody having had an accident or wound up in a catastrophe or having been tortured or whatever. So within your biographical time span, you know it's true what you're saying because you can recall it. I mean, mom and dad were there and grandmother were there, and I mean, they're witnesses. And then when you go beyond that, you may well think, well, this is nonsense. Why do I think of elephants? Why do I think of riding on elephants? Why do I see people with turbans? Why do I see other planets? Why do I see angels and demons? This is all nonsense. Am I going mad? But the fact is that these things come by themselves. You're not conjuring them up consciously or deliberately to just come. They press in on you, and along with that goes a somatic and emotional traumatization of such force that you know, I am not doing this, it's happening. So that is really the proof of the pudding. Also, I have this machine which helps to guide us towards the hot spot.
Right. How does it work? Can we plug it in?
It's a simple galvanic skin. Well, it's not a simple galvanic skin response meter. It's rather a sophisticated galvanic skin response meter. It connects with a plug, and then it has 2 electrodes, which is the simplest version. There is a more advanced version coming up soon, I hope, which works without electrodes. So now there's a needle here, and now you're wriggling the needle with your hands, as we have seen. And when you address an area of mental tension, this thing will rise. This needle will go to the left. Just open your hands a little bit. The needle goes to the left. And when you then come to the truth of the matter, the needle goes to the right. This is now simulated with your hands. Just make it go to the left by opening your hand. Okay, now that's charge building up, resistance building up, and then you close your hands and it goes to the right. That's charge coming down.
So how does this needle help you find out what's the way to go?
This is not a lie detector, it's a truth detector. Anytime you see something that's of relevance, you go, oh, and that moment of relief makes the charge go down and the needle go down. So any inkling of truth you're getting is registered here and makes me ask you for more. I ask you, that's the way to go. What else is there? What else is there? What else is there? So that machine helps me to keep the session very intense and on a narrow...
On a specific track.
On a narrow track.
Yeah.
Without the thing, the session works just the same, but it's perhaps a little curvier. And sometimes you follow a trail that turns out to be a blind alley, and then you have to return and go back to the main trail. So the session can be done without it, but that is, for the client, a shortener of time and an intensification.
And how long does it take, such a session? I mean, usually you have like, in a normal psychotherapy plan, you have like 45 minutes once a week or so, I guess.
Before I answer this, can we just do a real demonstration?
Of course.
Is this on the camera?
Yeah.
Just hold them still for a moment. Okay.
Maybe you hold it a little bit more in the front so that the camera can easily follow the needle.
Now let me ask you, Robert, an embarrassing question. Robert, have you ever kissed a girl? Yes. What girl was that, Robert? Come on.
Which one are you referring to?
Okay, there are significant downward motions to the right, so there's truth to my question, Robert.
Why wouldn't I have kissed a girl? Okay.
The moment you address something that's true and of relevance, it was not an almighty big slam to the right, so I know it was not a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
But you certainly have kissed girls. That I can tell from this little read. It's not more than that.
Okay.
You were asking me for the length of the session.
Right.
Well, in contrast to standard therapy sessions, which are done 45 minutes per week, in most cases, at least in this country, Germany, we are doing MindWalking sessions until the truth has been found and until the problem is resolved, which means we work from 9 to 6 really. So between 9 to 6, taking breaks, we clock up some 4 to 6 session hours, and that we do for a day and a half or 2 days, because after something between 10 and 15 hours, things tend to resolve. Sometimes a second session is needed some weeks later to really finish it up. But in my way of working, 10 hours would be a fast session. and 15 hours would be a good lengthy session. 20 hours is quite unusual, really. So in other words, you can get a lot done for a person in the time span of 2 or 3 days, which is rather, how shall I say, touching to me as a session guide, to see someone who's been sitting on something for decades, for this to be addressed and resolved within a time span of hours. And naturally, people are very happy about it. And the trouble is, I see most clients only once, because when it's gone, you know. There's no need to come back, except after a while you'll find there's yet another fence further out, and then a couple of years later I may see that client again for the next one.
So what is, I was going to ask you, what is the long-term effect of this on the client's life, everyday life, attitudes?
The effect is an increase of integrity, meaning personal wholeness, and an increase of ethics, meaning a considerateness with regard to the environment in a self-determined way. In other words, you know, to be very grand about it now, but even that happens, you begin to understand the purpose of your existence. And you begin to understand the route you're on to fulfill that purpose of your existence. And that's a very big thing to say. It's beyond this life. It's a spiritual reason for existence and a spiritual path. And people break through to that in an astoundingly short number of hours, which makes me very happy, because it means that we aren't as thick-skinned and calloused as one may think. There is a spiritual truth to be found under a very thin veil if you only address the person correctly.
Yeah, and this spiritual truth that people stumble upon when they undergo a session with you may very well be some kind of, there's a certain fringe factor in all this, right? I read in your book, which is, by the way, this is the German book, and it's coming out in English soon.
It's going to be coming out, I hope, this autumn under the same title, MindWalking.
MindWalking, yeah. It's a great book. I can highly recommend that. And there, it's basically, it also contains a collection of experience reports.
Yes, there are session reports, 135 session reports, and explanations of how this is to be understood and how can this be, because some very strange worlds and strange experiences are covered there.
And there's this fringe chapter, right, about aliens.
Yes.
How come that, how do aliens come into play in all this?
Well, that's a rather large question to ask. How shall I answer this? First of all, just merely statistically, a great number of people, I've worked it out in percentages, I've done a study on this. I believe some 80% of my clients find themselves to have come from other worlds outside this earth. Only a very few incarnations ago. So I have found that people have not incarnated, not everybody has incarnated and reincarnated on this planet since the Stone Age and before. There are plenty of newcomers. And I believe that the grand ideas in music and science and the arts and politics have been brought in from elsewhere. In other words, the bright people streaming in make this culture go on and on and on. The reincarnated Stone Age people don't. So, having addressed this concept of Earth being a point to migrate to or come to, you would on that journey, of course, meet all sorts of people, can be expected. And out of that, in that context, people come up with stories of encounters with spaceships. And I must make it very, very clear that in this work I am not suggesting anything to people. I only ask them to tell their story and what images do they see. And then people go into a state of incredulity and say, how can I see this? This must be science fiction. And I encourage them. And out they come with, call it spaceship scenarios and space battles and being abducted physically from Earth or encountering coming in from other astral planes or from wherever.
Amazing.
Encountering spaceship contacts and spiritual mutilations of all sorts. It happens to a surprisingly great extent. That's all I can say.
So undergoing a session with you is like watching Star Trek, actually.
It's not like watching Star Trek, it's like experiencing Star Trek.
That's amazing. Yeah. So what really fascinates me is the possibility that you kind of develop a memory or an experience, or let's say you remember an experience being an alien, an extraterrestrial being, or let's say some kind of spiritual, bodiless being or whatever, and that experience is still affecting you in your current life.
Yes, it is not a matter of it's all yesterday, why think about it? You started this session with this opening line, why worry about things of the past? And indeed, there's no need to worry about things of the past, except some of these things are not in the past, but with you in the present. The moment I say to you, describe a cat, you see an image of the cat. That cat image is now. The cat, the experience may have been in the past, but the image is now. So when, through an outside trigger, for example, you're watching television, you're watching Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever science fiction movie, and suddenly you feel somewhat heavier than before and somewhat painful here and there, and you get the horrors and the creeps and whatnot, and the next guy says, well, what's wrong with you? Everything's fine, it's just a boring sci-fi movie. So you're reacting to this. That outside trigger, in this case a TV program, brings into the present an image containing misemotion and physical violence, and that interacts with your present state, including your body. So, in that sense, we are not dealing with the past. We are dealing with what's now. Now, once you have handled that image, it is really in the past. It can't be brought up to the present anymore except by conscious recall, and that, of
Until
course,
that
is
moment,
harmless.
it still interferes with your present life and in your decisions on a subconscious level, maybe?
Exactly. It can interfere with your present life. At any moment, it's triggered on a subconscious level, precisely.
Okay, wow, fascinating.
Yes, and it is quite amazing to how shall I say, what a snowstorm of images can be around a person, making the person make decisions and choices and have predilections or withdrawals beyond their control, yet they think they're perfectly rational. Because as long as it isn't offensive to anyone, it's considered all right.
Yeah.
And they say, well, that's just Joe, you know. When he sees sailing ships, he just goes crazy and he has to jump on them, ha ha. Then when you take him in a session, you find out he had his greatest time in the 16th century as a
being a sailor man.
being a sailor man, right. So he's still, that fascination of back then is still with him. So that causes a compulsive behavior. He collects bottle ships. He takes sailing courses all over the world. And I mean, sailing is his thing. Why? It wrecks his family. It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. He's devoting a lot of time, energy, and money on a hobby. And that's all right as long as it doesn't really ruin his life. But you still wonder, I mean, what's going on? Okay, you could find out through a session that he's dramatizing, that he's replaying the grand old times.
Wow.
Perhaps he was the captain of the Titanic and is trying to make up for something.
You're not the only one who uses the methodology that you developed yourself, but there's some kind of a network of trainers, right? Across the globe?
Yes, I'm teaching this method. Anyone can learn it. It is not a prerequisite that you have to be a psychologist or have a university degree. Anyone can learn it. It is not therapy, as I said, but personality training, or perhaps mental coaching. So it's open for anyone to learn this. And indeed, MindWalking is trademarked, so there's a quality requirement, rather stiff quality requirements go along with it. So you want to call yourself a MindWalking trainer. In South Africa, for example, you'd have to have undergone certain training courses. You need a license to do that. And then you are a proper MindWalking trainer. And each session you do is written up, sent by email to your instructor, and your instructor goes through the session, puts his comments in, sends it back down to you before you see your client the next day. So we are very strict on quality control and on supervision. And yes, the trademark MindWalking is all across Europe and in the US and South Africa and Australia.
And how long have you been doing this? For how long?
Oh, I've been working on this for, since I graduated from university, really, which would be 40 years. But in this particular personal way, developing MindWalking, that's about 30 years ago.
Wow.
And the actual trade name MindWalking came up through a trip to Australia. They thought what I was doing was great, and what was I doing? And I said, well, I call it personality analysis and coaching. And they said, well, nobody can pronounce that. We have to change the name. So up came MindWalking. So the name was actually coined only 10 years ago. But my work goes back a lot longer than that.
Okay, great. So where can I find more information on this?
Well, you can find it on the website. You can find it on one book I wrote, which is called The Future is Yours. It's not with us, unfortunately. I couldn't get a copy in time. It's published with an English publisher, The Future is Yours. And then here, MindWalking, The Future Unburdened, will be forthcoming in autumn. And there's a website with lots of articles on it.
Okay, and we'll show the web link here in this video. So thank you very much for introducing, for explaining this amazing method to walk around in your mind, to find things, to stumble upon things that may actually cause problems in your present life, and to find, and it's a true adventure actually, right? It's a true adventure to find.
For both of them. I mean, the session guide never knows what's going to happen, neither does the session partner. It is a journey of discovery.
Yeah, so an adventurous journey into yourself. So thank you very much for coming, Ulrich Kramer, and thank you very much for watching.